Okay, so let me go ahead and start. And my intent is to do a quick introduction to the internals of NEM. We quite often start with a diagram that looks like this, and we've got this one red box at the top that's kind of opaque. And certainly there's going to be some amount of F caps in there. It's having to deal with possibly multiple northbound entities. In fact, even in one deployment, there might be multiple northbounds, one dealing with subscribers, one dealing with um, orchestration of services. And the other thing to highlight is that there's multiple workloads, or if I used core terminology, I'd call it profiles, that we sometimes have a BNG, sometimes we don't. So with that background, let me just real quickly, and I just wanted to look at a couple of slides and then show you just a little bit of what's there in the code. Um, this is cracking open the NEM box just a little bit, and there's a bit of a challenge here because anytime I put up a picture and something looks like PowerPoint, it looks like it might simply be an imagined implementation, but this is not the full gory detail of the implementation. I'll show you that in a second, but this is kind of lumping some things together just to give you a sense of what's there. And sort of the first level lump is that there's some authoritative state. It's it's state that's authoritative for this particular pod, this particular deployment. It came from somewhere. In fact, part of the challenge is that sometimes that state is learned from the components that live below you, and sometimes it's learned from the OSS system sitting above. And so the challenge for the blue box is the rendezvous or the synchronization of that state. There's the pink box with the various pieces of monitoring and data collection. And then there are the green boxes, the northbound interfaces talking to various entities that might sit north of this pod. On any given deployment, we don't have to worry about all of these, but I'm just kind of giving you the breadth of what's there. And the gray boxes are still a little bit abstract. They roughly correspond to microservices, but in fact, if you break them open, sometimes I've done some additional lumping there just to give people a sense that of the pieces. So on the monitoring side, there's going to be a bus that events are published to, and there's going to be a place, I've labeled it models, but it's really where the state is maintaining the relationship between all of that state. In Cord, we use Tosca on the northbound as our canonical workflow specification to bring up a system. And again, I'm focusing on NEM, so I'm ignoring everything that's both underneath, everything that's ONOS that's underneath. They're producing events and they're taking control instructions. Now, if I were to emphasize where the work is, I would the highest priority work, it would be the three boxes that I've marked in red. So we clearly need to get to work on collecting events from both an ONOS and everything that's back end. The models or the state, the authoritative state that's being maintained for this pod, and the synchronization of that state between northbound instructions and southbound discovery. And then the particular way in any given system, environment that we embed this, there will be, I'm calling it an OSS agent. We can invent different terminology there, but there's some translation that needs to go on. And so this is now my take on it. If I sort of drill down to just the next level as to what the priority tasks are for those three red boxes, in Kafka, we still need to define a common event schema. Don's been looking into this. Maybe he has more to say towards the end here, but Vez is clearly an option. We have to acknowledge that this bus is probably going to be used for multiple purposes, and so the obvious proposal is that we just divide those into topics and then reuse the same Kafka bus with different topics for different purposes. And we need to enable the Volta team to get busy publishing events, and so there's probably a little bit of event library work to go there. In the core red box where the state is, we have a definition of some parameters for ONUs, ONTs, and subscribers. They undoubtedly need to be refined. We also have an example of the state transitions that are required as you discover the PON network and as you get top-down instructions. Again, that probably needs to be generalized and expanded, but we have instances of both of those. And on the OSS agent, we have a little stub agent called Hippie OSS. Hippie just says yes to everything you ask it, but that clearly needs to be built out in more detail. So that's my take on the high-level tasks, the highest priority things that we need to get going on quickly. What I wanted to do is just emphasize that those are, oops, I wanted to do this first. Those are not just boxes on the board. You can instantiate, in the context of CORD, a profile. And what that basically means is that you run the Helm chart that brings up all the containers that bring up VOLTA. You run Helm charts that bring up all the containers, for example, that implement ONUS in the fabric and ONUS managing VOLTA. You bring up the XOS pieces. So there's some, these two instructions. Helm install XOS core brings up a bunch of microservices. And you bring up the RCORD profile. These are listed as optional. You also bring up Kafka. You bring up the OSS agent as well. So the instructions on how to do this are there. What I want to show you real quickly is just convince you that this is not in our figment of our imagination, and to give you just one level more of granular detail. This is the Helm chart directory of a download that I have of CORD. Every one of these directories has Helm charts for VOLTA, for the XOS core, for ONOS, and so on. I already have a mini cube Kubernetes cluster running on my laptop. Oops. And if I run the kube control command to get pods, I will actually literally see I've got the Kafka pod. These pods now are not physical pods. These are Kubernetes pods. I've got the Kafka microservices. I've got the Hippie microservice. I have the RCORD specific microservices. These are the pieces that synchronize between the database and the back-end system. So it's synchronizing with ONUS, it's synchronizing with the Fabric app, it's synchronizing with the Volt app, and so on, synchronizing with vRouter. This one that looks like it's crashed is actually doing exactly the right thing. This particular one is not a long-running service. It's just a job that starts up and loads Tosca into CORD so that everybody else starts configuring themselves appropriately. And then I've got a set of containers that are basically the pieces of XOS, but the core is the one that I've been calling attention to before. These are probably misnamed. There's just a database running. Redis is another bus that we're currently using. We'll probably consolidate these at some point. Tosca is that northbound Tosca microservice. So what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, whatever the number is, microservices running in what will be the NEM. And just a sense of what it took to get all of that running. It's basically, I just was doing a sequence of Helm installs for all of these pieces. So roughly this is what it took to get all of that going. Now, one last note, this is all RCORD, and that's just a starting point for SEBA. And so what we're in the middle of working on now is basically reproducing that in another repository so that SEBA can evolve without being in lockstep with CORD, whatever it needs. And so to a first approximation, what that that, the start of that is it's got the Helm charts that you need to bring up SEBA and, sort of appear to or analogous to the Helm charts, we have to bring up chord. And so maybe we organize things a little bit differently. We don't need everything that we had in chord. There's still a chord. I've just done a little renaming here to emphasize that this is not the same thing we were doing before. Onus and Votha are certainly there. If you look at the profiles, that's just the only thing I'm going to look at. Well, first of all, if I look at the services, we don't have all the services that are in chord. We only need this particular set of services to get started, and we'll, of course, add to that over time. If I look at the profiles, we don't have all the profiles that run in chord, and these names are just made up, and we can talk about them, but we envision at least 3 profiles: SEBA with the BNG implement in the aggregate switch, SEBA with the BNG implement in the OLT, and SEBA with no BNG. Those are simply 3 configurations. The Helm charts will be a little bit different, and services that get loaded will be a little bit different, but it's all the same mechanism that gets that going. So that's my quick survey. Let me stop and see what questions there are, and then I'll turn it over to Mike. Any questions? Don, you've, I understand, grabbed these Helm charts. Oh, there's one other thing, just one other thing to say. This came up last time. Let's see, I forget where it is in here. I think it's in the prereqs. Everything that I was just showing you is actually pulling the Docker containers off of Docker Hub. One of the things that you would very likely, almost positively do in a particular deployment is you would run a local registry. And so that's an option. We don't build it in what we've released so far, but certainly you can bring up your own local Docker registry, and then that lets you build the pod isolated from the rest of the internet, which is, for operational reasons, would be something you'd probably want to do.
Yes, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, good.
The quick question I got, Larry, and I was having this conversation with Don, is just as you go look through your deployment where you break out your FCAPs and then you go into an R-Chord deployment or Helm Chart for R-Chord or SEBA or whatever it becomes. What I wanted to make sure, and I'm just not close enough to it, to know that from the NEM deployment, that if you deploy those, what looked like the first 5, 6, 7, whatever they were, for those items, those, what do you want to call them, microservices, or those namespaces within Kubernetes, that is independent of what you place down below. In other words, if we nail down what the FCAP schemas are for things that go across the Kafka bus, or RESTful or specific API calls into what is below, the interface between those deployments are both those APIs and not the deployment scheme. And that's what I want to make sure that we maintain.
Yeah.
So you should be able to deploy NEM with the components of XOS, the components of, say, I mean, where I run into it is Kafka main node part of the Volta deployment or the R-Code deployment, or is it part of the NEM deployment? And I just want to make sure we're clear of.
Or SEBA.
Or SEBA, yeah. If R-Code becomes SEBA, what I want to make sure is we got both good nomenclature as well as clarity of, if whoever's responsible for establishing, hopefully a singularity of a Kafka, HA instance, that it falls underneath SEBA and or Volta, and or is it part of NEM? I mean, this is a question I've asked a couple different times. I just don't want, if somebody deploys Volta and it comes with Kafka and they become the master for that, and then I deploy NEM on top of it,
Well, the current design would be a internal to Volta Kafka bus and and it's for just its message passing among the different microservices that make up actual Volta. But alarms and other less time sensitive things would be on the SEBA Kafka bus.
Yeah.
Well,
does that make sense?
Who is authoritative in control of the bus? Is
Which
what I'm
bus?
asking. It's okay. So I know, but there's two buses.
Two buses. One is fully within Volta.
And that's my question. This is where I get, at least, looking from the platitudes of where I sit down into, okay, I've got a Kafka master that's down here within SEBA that does its whatever's pertinent to it. And then I've got one that comes with NEM. And I'm not having to do a nomenclature exchange. If I want to bubble any of those messages up from what's in Volta, with maybe, whether it's FCAPS related and I got operations says, I want to see that in my network mediation, is that a Kafka interworking, or is that I just deploy one time?
Well, right. So from AT&T's perspective, there's actually three Kafka buses. There's one that's BMAP, there's the SEBA one, and then the Volta. So what William is working on is kind of the north of the SEBA Kafka, and it's it's the same functional boxes that they have for network in NEM.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the same buses. What I want to make, I guess at the end of the day, what I'm asking is, if we're going to have a topics translation between Kafka buses, if we want to bubble from one to another, or whether the assumption was it was one Kafka magistrate and all topic nomenclature was consistent across all three. Because what I don't want to do is end up with, oh, I'm topic whatever / whatever / whatever, and I go, well, shit, I'm using that same topic up in NEM. Now I got to have a translator ring of, or is that up to the implementation?
I mean, so there's still, and I think Mike has some presentation as well. But I think the original discussion was that we would have an alarm topic. We would have a syslog topic.
No, I get that, but you could also make the argument that I'll have a syslog within Volta and a syslog within NEM.
No, but Volta's expecting to use this Kafka, the SEBA Kafka.
I get that, but if they have this, and maybe I'm too far from it to see, but if we've got the same topic name in two different Kafka buses, I got to translate that to be able to have one somehow, or another API going, I'm going to share my information that's on the syslog topic from Volta to the syslog, same name in NEM.
So the way that you're absolutely right that I just added this to the priority task. We need to reconcile all the Kafka instantiations. And what's happened is because different subsystems have grown up independently, they've all had their own Kafka. But there's absolutely nothing keeping us now that we're SEBA wide from saying, look, Volta and NEM are going to share a Kafka. Or not. I mean, we have that option. And that's just
that's where I'm at.
So Larry, the conversations we had with Ken, who I think he's on vacation, but when he was going over the Volta core design, they said that message passing would be the internal to Volta Kafka bus, and then there would be a separate Kafka bus for alarms, metrics, etc. And my question to him directly was, would this be the same as the one in SEBA? And he said yes.
Yeah, so that's exactly consistent with the way it works today. And
well, guaranteed deployment is we'll have information that's within the Volta. Will happen in managed buses, buses. And information that's within the NEM layer, that's another Kafka managed bus.
Yes.
Is somebody in operations going to say, I want to see the whole damn shooting match? So if I were in operations, and then when they see it, they're going to say, back off.
Well, but the one in Volta is just message passing between the different microservices that make up, right? So between the core and the CLI and the core and the adapter microservices.
That's like watching the message passing flow. I mean, that's up. Well,
one of the areas that I have heard from Jose's side is they've got a similar with DMAP, where they've gotten to where they want to be able, in essence, do like a regular expression. In other words, they want to have access to what would be down at the guts. You go, I'm looking for this specific instance that's relative to this container, relative to this subscriber, that the only place that that's pertinent and would be shown in its raw form would be down within SEBA. And they're going to be, if they're going to access that only through NEM, as long as we got a way to be able to go, I just want to look at be aware of, SEBA definitely has to be just to instantiate both the infrastructure as well as the discrete subscriber profile or container or whatever it manifests itself into. They really don't want to see all of it. They want to be able to query into it, which is kind of what DMAP does.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Kafka bus, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but the Kafka bus within Volta would probably not be meaningful to them unless they could read the source code.
I don't disagree with that, but remember, when we go into this, when you're sitting there troubleshooting it, it'll be you, or it'll, God forbid it be me, but it'll be Nick, or somebody who's skilled in the art, which is where we're going to take them to be skilled in that art. They're eventually going to be skilled in it. And this DevOps model that 18 break into, they're just going to have 50 different sites that NEM's not going to have a way to consolidate that. They're going to have to go to the 50 different Volta or SEBA instances and do what DMAP's trying to do with them for AIC, as I understand it when they tell it to. Right. So we got a similar, it's definitely tenable. It's not a big problem. It's just we need to be cognizant of, we're going to have some DMAP functional for the NEM, Kafka, masters, and then the one for SEBA or RCord or whatever we want to call it down at that level. Which almost begs the question is, we're creating yet, the DMAP brings a whole other Kafka.
Right. Yeah, I know.
So we just need to make sure it can interface cleanly with two systems and not have overlapping topic space.
So our internal discussions about the work William's doing is he would be pulling, subscribe to the topics on the SEBA Kafka bus and would be enriching them for publishing up into DMAP. So
yeah,
with sillies and everything else.
And I assume that you're doing the same function for the NEM buses, right?
Well, he's not.
But the DMAP function should. The AT&T management system, ONAV, I would think would be doing that. It's not a problem for us in the space of SEBA and NEM, but it becomes when I guess we call OSAM or ONAV.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess correct me if I'm wrong, Larry, but we're kind of at the point where we need to understand, is AT&T's needs, specific needs, generic enough that it would be just part of this, or
so that's it's a great question, and so this may be not granular enough, but every time you needed to do something that was AT&T specific, I think it turns into, okay, then create the microservice that does that. And SEBA needs to be general enough to accommodate a rich set of those and a different set depending on deployment. But at least at that level of architecture, we can generalize it. So this
and I think that, just to elaborate exactly where you're going, Larry, I think, is what, with the instantiation of that NEM, that mediation layer, I think is what the M stands for. What I want to make sure is we've got William here who's dealing with kind of the ONAP side, the DMAP side, is what I want to avoid as part of the architecture is I don't like the appeal of having DMAP talk to anything other than mediation. If it's got to talk directly to Volta,
we're on the same
so in other words, DMAP, the NEM has got to be able to translate or at least not have overlapping topic spaces. Otherwise, somebody's going to be wanting to go, I think it's cheaper and easier for DMAP to talk directly to SEBA, not through NEM.
No,
it won't.
Yeah.
Okay,
so it's
I'm good.
It's something like this, if I'm getting my acronyms right. I heard, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, if you put DMAP above let me get familiar with this. Well, I think that's it. Where's your
line here? The left-hand arrow from the Kafka bus to DMAP. There is a agent in between, right?
Well, right. So there's a question here as to whether you want this this particular microservice lifecycle managed by NEM or independently? And that's a separable question.
DMAP is fortunately or unfortunately going to be independent of
Right, but it's the agent William's working on, which is between the.
going to be the agent.
Okay, DMAP agent.
Okay, yes, that becomes part of NEM.
That's we're going to.
It may be an AT&T problem specifically, but it needs to fall in that NEM.
Right. So, but at the end of the day, we just need to do a deep dive and figure out if. And Mike Gasser's on, right?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, right. So we just need to figure out, is our needs viable for, you know, and is it just a, you know, a subclass, or is it, are we on a completely separate path? And I mean, that's just, we just got to hammer that out.
And I do think adding that along with, because I see OSS agent as something completely different than the DMAP agent, but I do think every other carrier that's going to come along is going to have this. It may not be DMAP, but this thing that they want their netcool, Tivoli, blah, blah, crap to get information into a legacy system. That's you could say it's an OSS, but it's not the, what I would call, at least in my mind, think of OSS. I think of BBNMS and.
Yeah, you're right. So it's that quote unquote, we'll label it DMAP for now, but you're right.
Fortunately, we know what that is for AT&T, but I don't know what that would be for Deutsche or Bain or whomever other carrier. Yeah. They'll have a similar function, and I think if we bound that up in that NEM, and then to your point, Larry, that the NEM deployment has to take care of the lifecycle management of that agent wrapped up in that, and of course the carrier's got to bring their, you know, what specifically. That deployment of that microservice. I hate to use that word because I don't even know what a microservice is anymore.
So I just have one last little thing, and then I'll turn it over to Mike, which is just I'm kind of giving you the relationship between, and this is the way it's working in our cord. So it's an example of this bottom-up detection that when you power up at home. Shoot, what's going on here?
Oh, you don't put animation in your PowerPoint.
Yeah, so this is someone else's slide. It's part of a demo, but just that the port has been this is you powered on an ONU. It finds its way up there. There had been some state up there, so this is just a little trivial example of some state that had been maintained there, so that when that upward announced discovery happens, you know what is allowed and what isn't, and flow back down. And I'm just highlighting that we can do it. Hopefully, we've got a schedule to do a demo of this next time or the time after on this call. But it's just one example of those northbound, southbound, bottom up, top down provisioning things that has to happen.
Yeah.
I do have some things that kind of discuss what we started to talk about in Volta. My slide deck did get a little bit heavy, so I don't think we'll get through all of it today.
Yeah. Let me pass the presenter to you. And now it's all yours. Great transition.
Let me see. Where's my thing here?
Larry,
Screen, all screens. Oh wow, look at that! I can share all screens. Look at that. No, I don't want to do that.
Dr. Larry Friday on some kind of cold
applications. I want to share an application. I want to share that application. Share. Everybody see that?
Can see it. Go ahead.
Can everybody see what's going on there?
Yeah. We see
fine. Blue screen with words.
Blue screen with words. There we go. All right. Introductory slide. Next slide. Okay. So these slides have been adapted from some slides that I presented in Volta. So if it seems like it's more Volta oriented, they started there. Hopefully I got them updated and that makes sense. But basically being able to deploy this pod and to be able to manage it in this this presentation is going to talk about how do we abstract things and how do we identify things and how do we put some more meaning behind things behind some of the dynamic things in the bottom-up approach that's going to be happening in Volta 2.0. So, I mean, there are going to be all sorts of pieces of what goes into a pod, some compute, some fabric, some aggregation, you know, Volta hardware pieces. There's going to be software pieces that go into this platform, SEBA, NEM, ONOS apps, Volta, all sorts of different pieces that are going to come into this pod. And we're definitely looking for SEBA to be able to manage that, run that, lifecycle manage it, all those type of extra things. So as we move to the next picture, this is your standard picture. Hopefully it's the latest one that we have, but this is your standard picture that I think we have all seen a million times. But so as we look at these different things on the page, we see a lot of different little separate pieces of how things come together. And from an OSS, from an upper level view, it becomes pretty hard to manage, and pretty hard to understand all the little details that are going in. So what we're looking about doing is providing a kind of consistent way of managing what's going on in the pod. I put BBS 383 up here as a model of things. There's a lot of stuff that's covered in BBS 380, WP 383 that can do a lot of this stuff. I'm not tied to that. I'm more tied to kind of whatever we can provide that is a very easy to use Yang level definition type of interface that can be, you know, abstracted into multiple different technologies. I think would be good. We do have the need to fit into a world where maybe the BNC is integrated into the device, and maybe we have an external BNG. We do have the need to possibly fit into a world where we have a completely bottoms-up model where maybe SEBA can dip up into a callback function of finding out where subscriber information is, versus I have a top-down model where I have some information pushed down into there. I think that creating an abstract model of how am I going to provide services is at least what we have recommended in Volta so far, and I think that it coincides. We have pulled a lot of this information together already, presented it on the Volta call, and so these are some of the areas we see that we need to manage. We need to manage, you know, the pod. We need to manage the OLTs. We need to manage ONTs. We see profiles and service provisioning as also things that need to get managed in a kind of in a top-down world. And then we have status reporting, which is kind of basically on-demand pulling of statistics. And then we have alarm and performance as well. Tom Moore has done a lot more definition on the alarm and performance monitoring. He's not available today. He's on vacation. So those things will be coming in the future. I don't think we'll get through all of these slides as well. But luckily on the status reporting stuff, that's just a lot of parameters and things that have to be able to be retrieved. So I don't see us going through each one of the status reporting slides, although there's a lot of good definition in there. So hopefully we can at least maybe get through this first part up here, where we talk about OLT, talk about the management, and then possibly some of the service provisioning abstractions that we're potentially looking for. So pod management, we kind of were talking about it earlier. How do I manage containers? How do I lifecycle manage software? How do I lifecycle manage hardware? How do I add potentially another Volta piece? How do I add another edge core? How do I add some, you know, pivot plugs into different switches? So all of that kind of pod management and stuff, I think, becomes very important. As we were talking about just a second ago, how do I add an extra microservice? How do I add an extra piece of the of specialized software that an operator might need? And how work into the management environment of well, either how do I monitor the resources that are available on the platform? How do I tell if my CPUs are getting overbooked? How do I tell if I have bottlenecks in central pieces of the do I have a fabric bottleneck? Do I have a CPU bottleneck? How do I see those states that are more pod related than maybe specific service related types of things? So those are all things.
I'm sorry, and I think you addressed some of it on the last slide and this slide as well. And I got a general question, and it may be a combination of what comes out of SEBA from the community and what comes out of AT&T. We've obviously got a number of parameters, for lack of a better term, of what we want to track from either resource utilization or current state that I think we bubble up in the NEM, and I want to make sure that's going to have both the state as well as some of these other parameters. And then the real question I got is, I'm assuming that there will be a kind of a library of parameters that everybody who deploys SEBA and NEM would have. That may be up, down state of a line, that may be subscriber, that may be infrastructure, maybe CPU utilization. And then there'll be another overlay to that the provider would have tolerances. My question is, who's providing the first one, what the subset of parameters are, and then I'm assuming the carrier may put a superset of additional parameters we would want to track as AT&T, and then who's providing the thresholds, and when can we get those? So is that, and Michael, it's part of our question too from our side, is from all of those parameters, whether they come in a Yang model or they come in something else, is that something that you guys on, say, Eddie's side are compiling at this point? And then the question, I guess, for Larry is, do you guys have a baseline set of here's the parameters that we're going to be tracking, either for an FCAPS purpose or just for a keeping the system stable and sanity check?
From our point of view, it's definitely a need that we see, but we have not gotten into the specifics of how do you manage a cloud or how do you manage this type of infrastructure. And we don't have that level of knowledge yet. I mean, we haven't been building AIC ourselves. We're hoping that ONS can bring those kind of stats to us and present that as what's available in Cord.
So Troy,
I'm less worried about. I'm sorry, just for clarity, I'm less worried about the management because I share the same comments that Michael was talking about there. We're figuring out how to manage, but this is rudimentary. This is fundamental parameters, not what the hell to do with them, what we got them, but just we know we're going to have certain parameters that are going to be consistent across SEBA as well as NEM, both infrastructure to subscriber as well as some other stuff that we probably haven't even thought about yet.
So Troy, so we have a version 0.1 of those parameters.
Excellent.
ONU, OLT ports, subscribers, yeah.
So we have well defined in our group, anyways, because that's what we have the most knowledge of, the type of OLT, ONT, subscriber, PM type of statistics that we think we need. So Tom has laid those out in alarms and PM. I have some of them here in the status section of this document. So on the OLT side, in terms of those types of parameters and things, we have those well defined. On the pod side, hopefully what Larry was just offering from the Cord and the pod side, hopefully they have those better defined.
So we believe that a combination of what Michael, you and Tom have, plus what Larry has, should be a go-to 2018 deployment. And if we haven't codified what that parameter list is yet, have we got a target date for that? And Larry, what I was in that was disguised the question. Yours plus what Tom and Michael have, and I'm hoping you've seen what Tom and Michael have, because that's going to be stuff that's going to be tracked up in XOS.
So I would if Jono is on, he would have the deepest insight into the connection between what we're tracking and what Volt is making available.
Well, this was even more specific to what Tom Moore and Michael Gassner just speaking there have, because that, to me, they've got the most experience of probably everybody on the call of here's what the hell comes out of a typical, GPON or PON type deployment. We know we need to say.
Yeah, and Tom's got that pretty well defined.
I don't doubt that, but what I want to make sure is
user stories around
all of that's got to be bubbled into what is instantiated in XOS to track and keep as I don't want to call it inventory, but a state management.
Yeah, state.
Am I right, Larry?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. The state management. But so if Jono is on, can you speak at all to what you've seen, what Tom has?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of what Tom has, but I think some of the things we're planning to cover in the next release, in the, sort of the next sprint of the NEM work, right?
I mean, we have a very good idea from the Volta calls that what Mike has specified in terms of what he'd like to see from, say, the AAA. What kind of the state machine, what he would like to see, what kind of stats he would like to be reported for all the ports, the UNI, the NNI, the PON ports, the ANI ports.
Good. So, and Tom and Mike, since you're speaking on behalf of you and Tom, I love the word like, but have you got a list that is a got to have, or we start to waver on a no-go versus a be nice?
Well,
we have presented an exhaustive list. We have not heard any pushback that we can't have the things that we've asked for. Maybe it comes down to a timing thing, and we have to prioritize certain pieces. I don't know that we have a prioritized list or a this is what we're going to get list yet. That I agree that would be needed. But Tom and I have provided the requirements level. And some of them are in the 36 slides here that we present today. So I will forward this on to the group, and we can all dive in and chew up. It's not anything new that wasn't presented before in terms of all of the status parameters that we were looking for.
Larry, who owns that on your side?
Well, we definitely need to get this into user stories. Tom has gotten a number of the user stories put in on Volta. For the Volta piece of it, we need to get a number of those user stories associated with NEM and we'll all of the stuff that's in this presentation, assuming that it went well. I was planning on getting into user stories into NEM so that they would be covered, and so I was planning on getting all of this into a user story in NEM, assuming that we all seem like this is a good approach.
By Friday?
By Friday?
It sounds like I've heard it a number of times, not from you, Michael, but just in general. When will they be in there if we're running on this September? At least and I'm looking for you, Michael, to be gotta have and nice to have. And the gotta haves, I want to make sure somebody on O&F side understands it ain't I like to have this, it's I gotta have this.
I will commit to having those. I will commit to having some of them in by Friday. I will commit to having all of them in by next week.
You rock, great. Yeah, and I was saying Friday is an arbitrary time, but obviously time is of the essence. But if we've got if you've got it, that way I can look at, and Larry, I'm just picking on you, but whoever on the SEBA side, has received them, and then it's no longer a conversation really AT&T specific, but we've seen what AT&T's offered as a critical have to have parameters, and those can be kind of codified as part of SEBA. Any carrier would probably have those.
Yeah, so two of our people have been working on the provisioning so far, Jono and Mateo, but that's where everyone else is going to be brought in. So as necessary.
Well, you rock. I think that'd be good. So if it's next Monday,
take Sunday off, but
take Sunday. You can have Sunday.
Work Saturday.
No, this is. And I'm giving
these sound reasonable.
I know. I'm giving you a little bit of a hard time, Michael, but obviously we're trusting you guys, both you and Tom, because you know the systems, what our operational brethren over in, whether it's Earl Megason or somebody in Phil Ostege's shop, that we're going to have in a way to be able to reasonably pass a red face test for taking it operational.
Right. Well, we'll get that in. I've been kind of waiting for SEBA to get spun up. We had our first meeting last week. This is our second meeting. I'm doing my first presentation, and presuming that it went well, I was planning on starting to input all those user stories. So
I trust you implicitly. If you need it, until you prove yourself wrong, you say you need it. We need to have everybody standing up and saluting and getting it. Now you become unreasonable like me, and then we'll have to have words.
So yeah, so this is kind of pod management. I'm gonna move a little bit into OLT management here and discuss a little bit about I can make it work. Hello.
Now, just before you get to that, to do the reverse for Larry, since you've got kind of a combination of what Michael's putting together and a combination of Larry what you've already got in XOS. Have you shared with what's in XOS with our folks like Michael and Tom and obviously Don as well? And we're going. Everybody's just like we want everybody to salute what Michael and Tom are putting up. We want to have everybody salute what you've got, so we don't get in September and go, "Who the F did this?"
Yeah, so I can point you at the code, because what we've got is what's in the code.
Yep.
And therefore, it's probably a subset, but at least it's well defined.
I'm happy with that, because I'm not expecting Tom and Michael to read code. So if it's in the code, somebody on.
Well, so by code, I mean a model.
Mike's against.
By code, I mean a model definition. We can make it more digestible.
I have 25 years of software development experience. I can read code, so I mean, thank you that I don't have to, but I am able to.
You just went from not expecting you to read code to expecting you to read code. Love it.
All right. So for OLT management,
these are model.
Yeah, for OLT management,
not Python.
Yeah.
When you have a shovel,
Okay. So I do want to get to, hopefully we got a couple minutes left, at least a couple of these next few slides. Hopefully maybe we can get past them. One concept of something that I have kind of modified in my mind of how things work a little bit is we were very focused on the Volta meeting on just looking at the Volta piece, and now that we have more of a pod view, we definitely see the need to probably tie something, and I've kind of coined a term, maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't stick, maybe we'll have a better term, of an abstract OLT as opposed to a virtual OLT, as opposed to a virtual piece. However, like to be able to glue some things together, glue some pieces of the pod together to and we want to be able to give it some simple types of terminologies that are just it's simple to do, simple to understand. We want to give it a name. We want to give it some slots and some ports, and so some basically just how do I describe where I want to put some service, what resources do I want to use to put some service, and then once we do that, we want to be able to inventory the things that are relevant to that piece of grouping of things that are providing the service, and possibly manage software upgrades and downgrades on these pieces of things that are getting managed. I mean, obviously, if an edge core box needs a firmware upgrade, we would need to be able to manage that. Maybe that's done more on the pod side. Maybe that can be done more outside of this instead of inside of OLT management. I'm not sure. I'm not married to where the management happens, but control that piece of art. If I have an OLT that's a kind of an abstract thing, I want to be able to reset it, and if I'm having problems in an operations side somewhere, I want to be able to bounce it. I want to be able to take it down and bring it back up so that hopefully maybe things get cleaned up a little bit. Maybe backing up and restoring the configurations. These are all things that they do on an OLT basis. Let me take all the subscriber provisioning that I have for this OLT and save it off at a certain point in time. So if I need to restore it at a certain point in time, that's what I have. Running any hardware diagnostics and getting those diagnostic reports out are things that operationally we do to try to troubleshoot issues and just getting all sorts of inventory information. And I think this last one that I added on here, maybe it's a new piece of information. But if I'm using an edge core and I'm using some compute and I'm using some ag, and what's the health of my OLT? What's the health of the things that are providing services? So if I need some kind of aggregate view of I'm healthy and I'm providing service the way I expect to, and it might be some combined status of some different pieces of information that go along with that OLT. So hopefully this next slide here is a picture of what I'm kind of talking about here for this abstract OLT. So I have a name. Maybe maybe for AT&T that's a silly code, or maybe that's just a text identifier or whatever. It's just a string that's naming a device that I want to put services on. I have an uplink port because maybe I'm going to go to an external BNG. So I'm going to identify on a particular ag switch. There's an uplink port that I have to use. I'm going to maybe have some edge cores that are there providing some ports available to this abstract OLT. In slot 1, I've got an edge core with 16 ports. On slot 2, I've got a second edge core with another 16 ports. Maybe in slot 3, I'm doing pivots or some kind of pluggable type of architecture where I kind of have a host switch and some plugs that go in there. And this just kind of abstracts upstream to basically saying, upstream I have an OLT. It's got an uplink. It's got slots and ports underneath those slots, and I can make a language to put services on different server instead of having to know specific dynamically generated OLT device IDs or ONU device IDs or those types of things. So as we move on to ONTs, we again want to be able to tie some specific information because we maybe need a concrete ONT ID that is definable and can be addressable from an upstream OSS management. Maybe the ONT IDs are dynamically changing whenever they come and go inside of Volta. So those things can dynamically change. Volta can stay dynamic and can be automatically bringing those up and automatically doing the bottoms up things that it's doing. But the concrete numbers is assigned here in this kind of abstract interface. And again, doing all the types of things you would need to possibly do operationally are the things that are listed here on ONTs. I've got a couple minutes. I'll try to plow through just service provisioning and how we get there and what we do. So the idea that Volta has come up in Volta 2.0 is to be able to have a technology profile. So for XGS, I'm going to have a certain type of technology profile that will be assigned with whenever I'm creating service on a specific device. Now, that technology profile is just a table ID. It's just a number. It's just I'm table ID 17. I'm XGS profile table ID 17. That's not very meaningful to an upstream device. So what we're looking to possibly do, and you might have, so maybe what might go in a technology profile is I'm going to have a 4Q model that puts certain types of traffic in Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, and then I'm going to assign each one of those queues to a different gem port, and then I'm going to, so there's pieces that go into what that technology profile is and how that technology profile operates. Now, maybe I have some differentiated types of services, and maybe for residential service, I'm more focused on best effort, and I don't need so many queues. But maybe for business service, I have a very definite 8Q model that might be for business service. So those would definitely lend to different technology profiles. But how do I identify that up to an OSS? Well, we want to basically be able to have an service type identifier, basically saying, I'm going to make residential service, or I'm going to make business service, or maybe if another operator doesn't care about residential or business, maybe they want to call their service 4Q model versus 8Q model. It's just a name, it's just identifier, it's just a tag that is dynamically put into the system so that it's not coded. I don't want to put residential service into a piece of code inside of Cord or SEBA or NEM anywhere somewhere. I want that to be provisionable, and it comes down and says, hey, these are my service types. These are the things I'm going to do. I'm going to do residential service. I'm going to do business service, and I'm going to do really, really fancy business service at a later time. So this is just basically setting up kind of a service type. Then as we come down to the next level is technology profiles. These are based on, I have G.fast, I have XGS, I have PON, I have different characteristics of how am I going to provide service on different types of technologies. And as I'm creating those profiles, maybe I'm creating some new ones, maybe I need to make some updates in my technology profile. I'm just getting table IDs. I'm table ID 17, I'm table ID 18, I'm table ID 19, and those things are kind of moving. So maybe I'm creating some more. Maybe I'm working through the process of defining for me as an operator. I only need 3 queues. I don't need 4 queues. I only need 1 queue, or whatever I'm doing as an operator to define how my service looks. These basic things are key value pairs. The technology profiles as defined today in Volta. But the thing that we're going to do here in an upper layer is be able to tie a technology profile with a service type. For residential service on XGS, I want to use technology profile 17. So on 17, I'm going to tag it with I am residential service. Therefore, whenever a request for service comes down that says I want to make residential service, I know I'm going to go figure out profile 17, and I'm going to use that in order to create service for that subscriber. And if I ever needed to potentially update and say, ooh, my technology profile isn't quite exactly what I need it to be, I need to make some tweaks to my technology profile, I can create a new technology profile, or I can edit an existing technology profile. But then I would potentially have to be able to have a mechanism to push those changes to those subscribers that might need those changes. I mean, if there's just something wrong with a profile that's causing service problems, I would one, have to be able to change it, and then to be able to push it to the people that are potentially using that profile. So that's kind of the idea of technology profiles. We go then, and we're a little bit over. I'm going to try to blow through here a little bit quickly. We have the same type of idea of a speed management profile. Right now, Volta is working on the idea of using meters for PON service, to be able to use the open flow meters in order to shape the data rates and everything that might be needed on a particular service. Now you might have business service that really has to have a specific assured value versus a best effort service that might just have a peak value and a minimum value. And so you might have different sets of profiles that might be for business, or might be for residential, or might be for different things. So we basically want to be able to set up all of the little infinite details of exactly where I want to set my data rate to ensure that I have overhead calculated properly, and I have maybe a wow factor built in. And all those little numbers of all the little fine little detailed numbers go into these speed profiles. But then I want to give it a name, just like I gave residential service a name or business service a name. I'm going to call this is my 100 meg name. And again, this is something that is dynamically assigned, not coded into anywhere. The name is assigned dynamically into the model. So, one customer say I might want 100 meg, another customer may call that gold service or silver service or whatever. Anybody can make whatever names that they want that are meaningful to them, and you basically tie that in with a very, very simple interface. So then once we have technology profiles and speed profiles and those types of abstract concepts of things, then we can talk about creating a service. So what are the first things that we're going to do when we create a service? We're going to try to identify where we want to put the service. I'm going to put it on this thing that has a name, and it has a slot, and it has a port, and it has an ONT number, and I'm going to give it an SVLAN and a CVLAN. And then as we go to the next page, I'm going to give it a service type. I'm residential service. I'm going to give it a data rate. I want to be 100 meg and 100 meg. It's a very simple API. It's a very simple. I want to put service here of this type, this speed, done, and it's just a very, very simple API. Underneath that gets turned into technology profiles and meters, and it gets turned into very, very detailed specifics on I've got to go put this flow over here to go from this PON port to this uplink, and I've got to put that in there with the right VLAN and those types of things. So all of that stuff that's underneath that's more complicated is accessed with a very simple API. Now there is some pieces here, and we're kind of out of time, and maybe we can talk about them next time. There are some other pieces that might be interesting to put in here. We do have, if we're going to potentially interoperate with legacy AAA services like Radius or like DHCP or like other things, there might be some configuration strings that need to go into that messaging that we would like SEBA NEM to be adding into the message string that goes up into get validated in our external Radius server. How does that get configured? Does that become very, very programmatic? And do we put formulas into SEBA that says you should be able to accept these wildcard strings and those wildcard strings and have a very complicated mechanism for defining that string inside of SEBA? Or maybe we just have an upstream device pass down whatever format we want it to be. So I'm on the fence as to whether this service API needs to put that information and send it down. Our upstream services in AT&T know these types of things. They could provide this information and pass it down. Maybe other operators don't. And today, in fact, it doesn't get passed down in any of the things we do today. Today, there's a complicated formula, or not a complicated, but a wildcard regular expression type of formula that you can specify in existing OLTs that allow you to set those strings where you need to set them. I don't know that we need to implement that. Maybe it's easy enough to pass it down, or maybe everybody says, no, yeah, that makes the interface ugly. I don't want to pass it down every single time. So these are some of the things that just trying to keep it as simple as possible. And for me, simple, adding this stuff into this interface makes it less simple. And so I'm kind of on the fence in a number of different ways, but we do definitely need to figure out how to configure these strings and get them moving. So I'm going to stop here since we're 7 minutes over, and I am going to put these. I'll put these slides up onto the SEBA Discuss site, and as you'll see after, the following slides, as you'll see here, basically go into these status parameters and status states and stuff of all the different kind of status stuff that we want. And this is stuff that's already been presented on Volta. And it'll be here in the next 20 slides. There's a bunch of stuff here in that, and we don't have to go through each one of those points. But these are the things about state machines that we definitely see are important to help us with troubleshooting and debugging what may be going on from an operational point of view. So we did kind of rush through that a little bit. It's not something terribly new, except for the composition of things into an abstract OLT. That's kind of a new concept that I'm presenting here for the first time. Open for any amounts of discussion that we can have. Although I think we're out of time today. So if you guys want to send me emails or post something up on SEBA Discuss to ask some questions, or we can obviously talk about it some more next week or sooner, however we can figure out how do we get
so let's try. So one, there is a folder we're collecting collateral and documents and so on. If we could get your slides there, that would be great. Two, that's a place to start. Well, next week I think we need to do the, I don't know, maybe it's the side-by-side, what are the key parameters discussion, if that doesn't happen before then.
Okay.
Why don't we?
Hey, Larry,
yeah.
sorry. What folder were you referring to? Because there's starting to be a lot of information in a lot of areas. I just want to make sure I know
Yeah,
what
so the wiki page is the place we're collecting everything that's collectible. And that wiki page I will post to the chat window here. If I can find the chat window. Chat, there it is. And now I just go to the chat window for the first time and realize that the map is misspelled. Okay, got it. All right, why don't we call this one a day? The video will be posted. We'll get together an agenda for next week, but I think we're getting close to we starting to write down some musts and not the like tos as best we can. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.